Welcome back to CodingCat.dev, where we give you cats the freshest dose of dev snacks. Here is Alex Patterson and Brittany Postma. Hello, welcome back, peeps. 2023 in the house. We are doing this as our first recording, even though it's not our first episode for the year. So we are here with Max. Hello, Max.
Happy New Year.
We've been harassing Max this entire time on the pre-show because his camera is amazing. You'll notice throughout that it decides when to zoom in on him.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
It'd be amazing if you could say, hey, zoom in now, and it would actually do it.
Probably can use the buttons. It does other things as well. Like...
Is that one of the ones that, yeah, I'm like, you can do the emojis and stuff. That's right. Yeah.
Okay, I might have to at least get some software that can do some of this stuff. I don't know. The Lumix is behind, I guess.
Yes, it's the Lumina. As I was saying before the show, I didn't really recommend it. It's very buggy. I feel like
I was like, it seems a little finicky.
Yeah.
It has good clarity though, so that's nice. Yeah. Anyways, so Max, can you give us a little information about your background, kind of how you got going in like the open source tech world, and probably another product maybe that others have heard about that you were a part of in the beginning?
Sure. So I never thought I wanted to do development or be a programmer, even though my dad introduced it to me when I was 6. Like I think a lot of British kids my age, because the BBC sort of funded this computer that they called the BBC Micro, and it sort of ended up in everyone's household. It was relatively cheap.
I've never heard that before.
Yeah,
me either.
Thing. Yeah, and it booted straight to a basic prompt, so it booted into a programming language. I think like quite a lot of computers at that time, but it meant that a lot of kids my age sort of learned to program essentially, and I would go to the school computer lab at lunch and crack out like programs with my friends, and we were trying to make video games and things. And as a result, I was trying to make games. I never really considered it for a career, and then I remember I met some people who worked as developers one time, and I thought they were like the geekiest people I'd ever met. And I was 13, 14 years old at the time, so I was very influential in that capacity. So I went off and did a chemistry degree, and after getting that, I spent a year in industry and realised it was a horrible mistake, and I hated it.
What kind of jobs do you expect to have coming out of chemistry like that?
Well, exactly. I was naive and stupid. I think what happened is I watched too many sci-fi movies and thought that science was like that. You're going to build time machines and you're going to change the world or destroy it.
So my husband has a biochemistry degree, and I was wondering the same thing. And he went on to med school, so that's one path for scientists, is to go into medical school. But he also worked for Pfizer, so pharmaceutical companies, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I grew up near Midland in Michigan, and they have Dow Chemical, so there's a ton of that. But I was always curious, when you go into that, what do you expect to do?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I was naive about it. I enjoyed the schooling. I remember enjoying learning how chemistry worked and doing all the diagrams and things. But as a lot of careers are, the schooling is very different to the reality, and it was really depressing. I remember I went back and lived with my parents. I didn't know what to do with myself. I just quit because I just couldn't handle it, and so I installed Linux on my home computer. Because I'd heard about it and it seemed cool. And I fell into working on open source because it was such a welcoming community, and I had this programming that was just a hobby, but I'd always enjoyed it. And so I started working on apps, and I got into a few that became somewhat popular, working with other people, and it just dragged me into it. I loved the way it was global. There was people from all over the world. I loved the Unix tool set. I loved Linux, even though there was so much that could be improved, and I loved that. I wanted to help make it so much better. In the end, I fell out of love with Linux because there was one time where my Wi-Fi driver just kept failing, and I couldn't get on the internet to figure out why it was failing. And it was just I was like, I want an operating system where I can rely on the Wi-Fi. So I switched to Mac because of that. Apple have a good open source background.
I feel like that's the programmer conundrum too, is that if we couldn't Google why our things are not working, would we even be programmers?
Yeah. Like it teaches you a lot of skills, I think in a way people don't learn as easily anymore because since Stack Overflow especially and things like that. Before Stack Overflow, finding the answers to problems was so much more difficult that you had to learn like this more hardcore approach to solving problems. But I don't miss having those weeks of frustration figuring out how to do things because all you can find is one entry on the internet on a forum somewhere where someone asked a question and then the next answer is, "Oh, I fixed it," and they never say why or how they did it.
No clue.
That was so common. I was doing open source, and my parents kicked me out of the house and told me to go get a job.
Go figure, huh?
I was working nights, so I wouldn't have to talk to them, living under their roof, like waiting for leftovers to be left when they went to bed. So I get why they did it. And so I approached this startup in London called Last Femme, who were using. They liked one of the apps I'd been working on. It was a music app called Amarok, and so they gave me a job. So I got into the industry via open source. So for me, open source has always been, the main reason I'm in this, and it's how I managed to get paid doing something that I love.
Nice. Did you find that transitioning like past that first initial like career was challenging to stay in open source? Was your next move, was it Homebrew after that, or where did that kind of fit into the timeline?
Yeah, so I was at Last Femme like 3 or 4 years, which is pretty much the longest job I ever had. But it was really fun to work there. It was the beginning of Web 2, so we felt that we were actually changing how the internet worked.
Yeah.
So their software was open source, but I wasn't really doing much outside of Last Femme open source wise for most of my time there. But towards the end, I was lead developer on the client team. So we made all the apps that Last Femme had, and there were 6 of them. One for Windows, Linux, and Mac, and Android, iPhone, and a BlackBerry app, because BlackBerry had a very brief app store. And maintaining these 6 different apps was awful. We used Mac because it was like the common platform. You could install the Android SDK on a Mac, and you could run a Windows emulator on the Mac, and then a Linux emulator for just general getting Linux working.
It was almost always like a default, because if you ever wanted to go iOS too, like you had to have a Mac. So it kind of kicked that off.
It's hard to believe nowadays, but at the time, Mac was not the platform for developers. It was 2008, 2009-ish at this time, and I was, all the designers and all the executives used Mac, but most of the developers had Linux, and I was one of the few developers that had a Mac, and it was around then that it started to shift. And probably Homebrew was part of that reason, honestly. I have no way to prove that. But before Homebrew, getting the tools you needed as a developer on your Mac was not as easy, not as fun. There was other package managers. There was MacPorts and there was Think. And MacPorts, everything compiled from source. Well, Brew compiled everything from source initially, but I did the enormous shortcut of cutting out the bottom 80% of the stack and just relying on what Apple provided for us. So the amount of time it took to get the tools you needed was cut from literally 10 or 11 hours down to maybe 30 to 40 minutes. It was a very compelling feature.
That's crazy.
Yeah. This was an era before. I was talking to the current lead maintainer on Homebrew recently, and we were discussing how it was then. But this was before continuous integration, before the term even existed. And the idea of continuous deployment was also something that nobody had really thought of. And so for open source to be able to provide binary packages, it meant that people had to donate the hardware, like other people who cared about what you built. So for Brew, that didn't happen for several years, because it took several years for people to think, oh, that Brew's pretty great, so we should let them have some hardware so they can build binaries. So compiling from source was really the only option. I remember on Twitter there was some guy who was giving me a hard time because we compiled from source. I was like, well, what else are we going to do? You going to give me a computer?
Every time. That'd be wonderful, right?
Yeah. And like, so I started T now, which is, it's Brew 2 in the spiritual successor. And, straight away we're doing binaries, and you can't even compile things from source by default, because compiling things from by source is a nightmare, really. That's why there are package managers, because we know how to do it, and we put the frustrating work into figuring out how to do it for you. Different era. So, well, anyway, your question was about how Homebrew started and what open source I was doing up until then. And I started Homebrew because we were doing these 6 apps, and it was difficult. All the different open source libraries we used, all the different build systems, and like we spent, I don't know, 30-40% of our time just messing around, getting the build systems to work, getting the libraries to work, keeping everything up to date. And I'd complain about this all the time with my co-workers, and one day one of them challenged me to do something about it because they were fed up with me making so much fuss. And I went home and I realised that I hadn't really done any new open source in a while, and I wanted to, so I got started essentially with what became Brew. After a few months it was super useful, so I open sourced it, and then it took another 6 months before anyone noticed it. But
and then it's like crazy used ever since. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah, the adoption was really phenomenal, and I loved it. It was so fun to work on something that everyone was super passionate about. The timing was perfect for what it was, and the stack I used was perfect timing. Like Ruby was becoming really popular at the time because of Ruby on Rails.
Yeah.
And Mac was the up and coming dev platform. And MacPorts wasn't really good enough. For a while, our tagline was MacPorts driving you to drink? ? Try Homebrew.
Oh my goodness.
Which, after a few years, we realized was pretty rude. So we got rid of it. But at the time, it was fun.
It still sounds super fun. I mean, you have brew as the name, you have casks, you have pouring. I mean, it's got to be fun at the end of the day, especially at the bar talking about this stuff.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time thinking about the names of everything in Homebrew, because I spent a lot of time in general designing it so that it would be easy for people to come into the project and figure out how they could be part of it. And one thing I've always noticed with dev tools is, and a lot of technically minded software, is that people use terrible names for things, and you can't figure out what anything does, or some things don't even have names. They're just referred to with half-sentence descriptions. And if you want people to contribute, you've got to get them understanding things as quickly as possible. So all the names in Brew were attempts at metaphors, so that you could understand, or at least have an inkling of an idea about the design and architecture of the entire system. And I think I was mostly successful with that. I went a bit far in places.
I think it's still super fun. It is cool that they connect through too, though. Let's take a quick break with our sponsors here, and then we'll come back and chat about tea.
How in the world could I forget about this?
There's no need to freak out. We have Storyblock.
Robert, you're right.
But we still need a plan.
Okay, how much time do we have left until the launch?
24 hours.
Okay, let's go.
We are ready to publish.
So let's get this baby online.
Thank you again for sponsoring us, Storyblock, in 2023. Really appreciate that.
Yeah.
fun new.
That's awesome. Nice new ad going.
Yeah, that's pretty wild, right? So Max, you kind of broke down like your open source and how you kind of came up with Brew and some of the naming fun, and now you've named a new fun product called T, or T.xyz is the domain name. It's probably incorrect to call it a package manager, from what I understand. Do you have a better description of like what T is and kind of what T offers?
Sure. So, it's a little tongue-in-cheek when I say it's not a package manager, because obviously it is a package manager. But, I haven't worked on Brew much since like 2016 or so. Burned out. And I felt it was done. It was good enough. And so I wanted to move on to other things. And it's a good product, but the reality is, like, once you build something, you're always thinking about what the next version could be like. And so over the years, I had like all these notes, and I was like, oh, I could do this, and I could do that. And it was funny, like last year when I was, I was talking to a friend, and he's always been into crypto stuff, and I never really was, because for like many people, skeptical about it. And he's always been trying to get me into it. And then he, NFTs were going crazy, and so I started to look in all the other stuff, and I saw this connection between what you can do with crypto and funding the open source community. And then I had this moment of inspiration where I realized that a package manager knows the entire open source ecosystem, and so with smart contracts and crypto, we could effectively fund open source. And like my career has always been one where I'm in between jobs doing open source, or doing 2 jobs at once doing open source. Like Homebrew was 2 jobs at once for years and years. So I managed to get funding and, founded T. And, I never really thought I'd do a Brew 2, because even though I had all these cool ideas, I just didn't really want to do it again. I'd done it once. I like doing new things, but because I saw this idea for funding how open source works, at the time I was working on open source and not getting paid, so I've always wanted to figure out if there was a solution to that. And I tried a few things, and over the years they didn't really work, but this one I think will. But as a result, I get to write a new version of Brew, essentially, like something which is a package manager that is new. And I came at it with the perspective that package managers are this really powerful tool. They make it so that all the other things that you need as a developer, or like any kind of person using a computer, frankly, like over the years with Brew, I received emails from architects and musicians and scientists and all sorts who use Brew because it was really the only way to get some of these tools. Some of these complicated like stacks of open source software, you need a package manager to provide that. So I realized that, there's so much more that can be done. So T, it's out now. I go to T.xyz and you can follow the link to the GitHub. It's been out just about 2 months. And so it doesn't even have an install command. It's like one of the crazy things about it. Like, what's a package manager without an install command, right? It's crazy. And that's because I don't think you should really install things in a global sense if you're a developer, if you're working on things, and in many other ways as well. They should be like, people spin up Docker instances all over the place nowadays for the exact reason that they want a container. They want it to be containerized and separated. So T, things are never really installed in a conventional sense. You run T commands and it gives you access to the open source ecosystem. It puts all that power at your fingertips. And as I built this out, I started to realize that it was actually really cool and interesting how it can work because of that. And so we've extended it all over the place. And now we've got what we're calling T pipelines, where essentially you can construct it's just a Unix pipeline. But any tool from the entire open source ecosystem, just bung it in there. You can share that with anyone. And then they're not really installing anything. There's no permanent consequences to this. It doesn't matter if you've already got a version of Node installed and this one requires an older version of Node. It's not going to break anything else that you're working on. Every project that you have on your computer, every project your team has, every project that you work on as an open source developer, it has its own containerized environment and you can work on it separately. You're not worried about the pollution that might happen between these different tools. And it's pretty great. And like the next version, I'm making it so that you don't even need to type in T. We're hooking into the command not found handler, and we're just going to like auto install everything you type in. And we played with this idea.
That's crazy.
We played with the idea thinking it was dumb, right? Because like, surely this isn't really what you want. So I put it in my shell configuration and tried it. And after a few days, I was like, this is insanely good. It's just so much fun. You can just type anything that you see from the internet and try it out immediately. And there's no permanent consequences. Just
hang on. So let's talk about this a minute.
Yeah.
My brain just kind of broke. So like if I want to run a Docker command, I don't have Docker installed. I type Docker. You're telling me like it auto installs that thing?
So it's like npx without the npx.
Yeah. Well, you can type npx if you haven't got npx installed, and it will install it and then do whatever you've told it to. Npx create React app or whatever, CRA, whatever. I can't remember the thing, but yeah. So like, yeah, it's quite nice. And I designed the installer so that the installer is it pretends it's T. So if you don't have T installed, you can use the installer line and then type whatever else you want after it. So yeah, I did that so that, I noticed after a few years of Brew being popular that every blog post about anything starts with first install Homebrew, then brew install foo. I was like, well, that should just be one line, right? So you can do the shirt cool TXYZ curl. So you need curl. I spent a while trying to figure out how we could do it without curl being installed, but it's pretty sensible default for most systems to have it. And then you can type npx init or whatever, npx create React app, and it will grab Node and grab npx, call the create React app bit, and then you'll just end up with the directory there. And you step into it, T knows that it's a React app and loads Node into your terminal. So, and then when you cd ... it's gone. If you type Node again, it doesn't work because it's not there. Well, it will with the new version, right? Because it'll work. But when you step into the directory, it uses the correct version of Node. Like, this is really neat for things like just trying out if your project's going to work with the latest version. Like React Node 19 came out last month, and with T you can just do Node _19, and it knows to grab Node 19 and you can do npm start, and then you can see if it works. If it doesn't work, then you can go, I'll try that later, and like Node 19 is gone. It's not there anymore.
So it sounds like it's a lot of things kind of wrapped up into one.
Yeah, I'm trying to simplify it a little bit, but essentially T is like an environment manager. I think it's like the way we should talk about it. So you construct environments which are collections of open source software, and then in some manner you're utilizing those, be it like a project you're working on or a script you're running. Like with T, you can put the dependencies for a script at the top as YAML front matter, and as long as you're executing it via T, which happens automatically, right? If you use the T magic where whatever command you type just installs it, then that script can depend on like anything from open source, which is something I've always wanted. Like, I think the power of scripts in open source history has been limited by the fact that if you're writing a script for other people to use, you don't want to make them install a bunch of other stuff first. So you end up with a bunch of like crappy bash scripts because everyone knows bash is installed. But like writing scripts in bash is awful. If you want to use Ruby or Python or even like Dino or for TypeScript, then it shouldn't be something that you have to put a burden on the person you're giving this script to. It should just work. With T it does.
So I love all like the technical parts and pieces, but something that like really stands out to me, and probably you as an open source maintainer contributor, there's kind of this concept of paying these contributors. How does that work in T, and what does that look like?
Yeah, so we haven't implemented our blockchain component yet, but we're doing heavy research on it. We got a white paper out which gives the gist. So the gist is, because we're a package manager, we know the whole open source graph. we understand the relationships between all the different packages, so we know which ones are important and which ones aren't. It's a kind of page rank, effectively, and a page rank that can't be gained very easily. Like, if you are like someone who wants to steal money from the system, you could say, okay, I created this dependency and this dependency and this app, and they use it all. But if nobody uses any of that stuff, there's no actual usage, then you don't get any money from it, right? So we're directing the token to the actual usage based on the dependency graph. So it's a really nice use of cryptocurrency, in my opinion. And, I keep hearing from people that it's one of the first genuine utilities that they've seen for cryptocurrency that isn't a scam, and that's rewarding. But obviously, we're hoping to have the testnet up by the end of the year.
Cool.
We're doing some serious research right now. We're trying to figure out what kind of percentages, because one of the features of it is token enters like at the top into like packages that don't have anything that depends on them, and then it flows to the dependencies for each of those packages all the way down. So the stuff at the bottom which doesn't get funding. Like I use Core.js or JS Core, I forget which way around it is, as a good example, because like pretty much every Node app that exists depends on this package, but nobody knows they're depending on this package. Like, we call these projects Nebraska projects after the XKCD comic that pointed it out. It's called Dependency, and it's block Tower of Bricks. You've probably seen it. It's very famous.
I don't think I have seen this.
Down at the bottom, there's this little precarious brick, and there's an arrow pointing to it, and so it's holding up the whole software ecosystem essentially. And the arrow says, "This project thanklessly maintained by some person in Nebraska since 2003." And that's the problem we see with many of the existing attempts to fund open source, like bounties and sponsorships, is that they only really sponsor the top of the stack, the sexy stuff that everybody knows about. And there's commonly issues with some of the projects that we call Nebraska projects. Like last year, there was Log4j, and they're this little known dependency that it seems like an awful lot of enterprise software depended on. And there was a major security exploit discovered, and all these people were scrambling to like figure out what this project they've never heard of was. And there's these poor maintainers who are getting all this abuse and like hateful email because their project has this security problem that's, Minecraft could be rooted by typing something into the chat box, if I recall correctly.
Yeah.
And, with our system, they would get a token in proportion to their usage. So they could use that to pay for maintenance and like work on these projects, hopefully, full time. That's the plan. Make the token valuable enough that people can work on open source full time. Like I've wanted to my entire career. Like, I'm hoping it makes it possible for people to like quit Facebook and Microsoft and companies like this and work on open source, because I don't think that a lot of the people who work at like Facebook and Google are really contributing like the best value for. They're very smart people, and they shouldn't be tweaking ad algorithms. They should be making the software that powers the internet. That's what they're capable of doing. So I'm hoping, once the token gets up in utility and value, based on like the package manager being a genuinely useful tool, that sort of scenario could happen.
So I'm horrible with Web3, but what does that essentially look like? Every time I want to install dependencies, I would need enough like tokens to purchase that, or like how does that actually work?
Well, obviously we considered the idea of micropayment system.
Yeah.
So installing Node would cost you, I don't know, 0.001 cents or something. But fundamentally, I don't think this would work if we changed how open source is used now and consumed and how people expect it to work. Open source is free. I don't think T would succeed if you had to do micropayments for everything you installed, even if they were small. So we are using a proof of stake model for the blockchain. And this is like one of the reasons that I think this could only work with cryptocurrency. So proof of stake, apart from the fact that it's more energy efficient than Bitcoin's proof of work type system.
Yeah.
Ethereum recently switched from proof of work to proof of stake for that reason, to save the world, avoid climate change. But with proof of stake, periodically there are rewards that are created. Like effectively, you're inflating money out of thin air, and those rewards go to the people who are staking the system. So in our system, you stake against the packages you care about as a user. So T could tell you which ones those are. You've installed these packages, so you should stake against these packages. Well, I'm hoping companies, big companies like Microsoft, can get all their staff to get T to calculate their dependencies, so that Microsoft is actually staking, $5-10 million a year against all the open source they actually use. That's really money for them, but it goes a long way.
And like Brittany would probably have to put $1 million in for Svelte because she installs it so often.
Yeah.
No, that's a really cool idea, especially at the corporate level where they're utilizing so much open source these days, and like just no financial contribution back, or at least in hours for people like maintaining things. That would be huge.
Yeah, indeed. I have some sympathy for that, because if you're using 90, 100,000 open source projects, it's not realistic for you to really contribute to all of those. It's not even really realistic to contribute to just a few.
Right.
But effectively, we're automating that for you. And so I believe that there will be no excuse. And that the people maintaining open source, are very quietly optimistic about what we're doing. I've had a lot of private direct messages from the people who could actually benefit from this. They're really excited and hopeful that this is going to work. Like, the skepticism I get is from the consumers of open source who hate crypto. Like, we were on Hacker News very briefly when we launched, and it was taken down because any mention of crypto is an immediate ban. And so, we're having to do a lot more grassroots marketing than I think is really fair. I have a hit list of companies I'm going to shame one day. It's shocking.
Yeah, it's really
any mention of crypto, and they're like, we're not doing anything with you. Nothing.
It's really frustrating that blockchain and kind of Web3 stuff has gotten so entrenched with crypto so tightly. It's frustrating.
The bad rep is deserved. Companies like mine are going to have to pull it out of that bad reputation, and it's going to be slow and difficult. But there was a lot of scamming, and there was a lot of stealing. There was a lot of bad actors involved. Mm-hmm. So I sympathize.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
we're a good company. So we're not going to make any money out of the proof of stake system. There isn't a percentage that goes to our company. Everything goes to the people staking because they need rewards, like bank giving you an interest rate, right? And then 50% or whatever percentage people decide goes straight into the open source ecosystem, and all the way down to all the.
That's amazing. Just imagine if that was their day one, just how many more people could work in that industry, in the OSS industry as a whole.
Like, people like myself, we want to work on open source. It's what we enjoy the most. Everything we do at T is open source, so I'm getting the best of both worlds now. It's true.
It's true.
But, there's a lot of people out there
helping and
struggle. They struggle. They would love to work on open source full time, but people need to eat.
Yeah, totally. People have families. Gotta take care of them. I'm probably missing a million questions about T, because often when we have products like this, I just haven't used it enough. What am I missing next that's still out there?
Well, we got some exciting things planned. I'm very, very excited about one of these things we're building, and don't know if I should. It's going to be cool when I release it, and I'm trying to keep it secret.
We're a couple weeks out from releasing the episode, if that helps.
Yeah, no, it's going to be mid-year.
I tried.
But one of the things that I'm working on currently, which I think is going to be pretty cool, is what I call T/command. So T by itself, as I say, doesn't have an install command, but sometimes you need an install command, and we made it so that if you make a symlink to T with the name of a utility, and this was a community contributed feature actually, just proving the value of open source. I don't know why it didn't occur to me. It's a great idea. So if you have a symlink like it's Node and it's a symlink to T, then typing Node installs Node if it's not installed. Otherwise, it just executes it. And I've had a lot of fun with this. Like I sign all my Git commits, but it's partly because I'm working on T so much. I delete my T directory all the time. So I had this period of weeks where every time I deleted the T directory, I couldn't sign my commits. So you'll look on the history of T, the commit history, and half the commits are unverified and half of them are verified.
I'm so bad at keeping up with that. I feel like all my stuff's unverified.
Well, one of the things that's going to be great about what we're doing with the protocol is everything has to be signed. Otherwise we can't give you money because you have to prove. Like that's part of the nature of protocol as well, of course. So as soon as we implemented this feature, I have a symlink to BPB, which is the thing I use to sign my commits. So it's just a small Rust utility that does GPG signing, but it's just way easier to use. So now, whenever I delete my T directory, as soon as I commit, T automatically installs it again. It's just making it transparent so that you're not thinking about whether or not you have to use the package manager. It just magically happens. Which was kind of a lot of the goals that I had going into this. It's like, abstract away the package manager. No one likes package managers. They're tedious. They're in the way. You have something you're trying to work on, and I want you to work on that. And I don't want you to think about T or the package manager. I just want you to get on with what you're doing. Anyway, that was an aside. T/command is... why did I even talk about that? I don't know, sorry. But essentially, if you fork this repository and you make it in the right format, then we automatically will bring that in for T. So the entire sub-command system will be something that you can contribute to without a pull request. And, one of the things I learned about open source is that a lot of people are terrified of making a pull request. They see a big, important project and they're like, I'm not good enough. I can't do that. So with this mechanism, I'm taking away the need for you to even think about that. If you have a cool idea, fork the repo, implement it, and then next time you type it into T, it'll be there. Now, obviously, I'm going to ask the user if they're sure first, because I don't want to be executing unvetted code automatically. Yeah. But it'll be there, and so that's coming out hopefully within the next month or so. And that idea was because I know open source is all about the other contributions, everybody else's participation. Otherwise, it's not open source, and you don't get the best ideas, and you don't form the best way forwards with what you're doing.
How do you handle a malicious actor like that? Will it at the T level stop that, or?
Yeah, well, I probably won't initially implement anything to allow us to blacklist, but almost certainly pretty quickly we will have a blacklist that gets updated before we install the thing that might be bad. But it's something you've got to think about. The truth is, there is an awful lot of trust in open source, an awful lot. When you got, Node has made it even worse than ever with 3,000 odd dependencies being installed, and nobody vets all of that. Nobody. One of the nice things that we're going to have with our protocol, an additional benefit that we realized while we were designing it, was that we can take away people's token if there's malicious intent. So we call it slashing. So essentially we can improve the security of the open source ecosystem, provided that there's enough people looking for that. And we incentivize people to look for it. So if you find a malicious piece of code in a popular open source project, you submit that to the TDAO, and if we agree it's malicious, then you earn the token that we take away from the project. We give it to you. So it's like incentivizing white hats. I mean, sorry.
white hats.
But in a greater and broader sense. So I'm very excited about what we can do for the security of the system. I think it's only going to get worse. But there is a remarkable amount of trust, is the truth. All of us, when we're building things on top of open source, we're just crossing our fingers, really.
Yeah. Here we go. Every day. Cool. I mean, that's all of our questions. I'm kind of thinking out loud here that we're probably going to have you on again in 6 months to see where this thing really heads to. It's going to be interesting to like one day maybe never mention NPM or homebrew again. Like that would be weird. And we just talk
Yeah.
about tea. So
Well, you know, maybe NPM will disappear, but I don't intend to replace NPM. I just intend for people to use it via T. Something
that's
I
fair.
intend to try and clarify. Like we're hoping NPM's registry, they'll want to move it into the T graph,
yeah, for
so
sure.
that people get compensated. And that's, it's going to be open source and open in every sense of the word, so that they can, and we'll provide libraries and tooling to make it easy. But yeah, I don't believe in replacing some of these things. Like we're replacing some of these system packages to some extent, but we're not going to replace npm.
Fair enough.
The JavaScript community know best how to replace npm.
We hope. I don't know. Cool. I think what we're gonna do is move on into our perfect picks. And actually, Max, you are up first with your sweet warp.
Oh yes. So I only discovered this week, which I think is terrible of me. Like I should obviously know these things much sooner. Not sure how long it has been out. Maybe it's more recent than I think, because it's so polished. I just assume it must have been out for a year. So I was a Linux guy for years, and then I switched to Mac one day because my Wi-Fi driver wouldn't work, and I just got fed up with it. And I've used the default Mac terminal since, even though like everyone's like iTerm 2 is a fabulous terminal, it's better than the default. I found the Mac terminal to be pretty great, and I tend to like defaults, especially when you're doing things like packaging. As soon as you change anything, something breaks somewhere. Like when you're trying to build 10,000 packages on a day-to-day basis. But I think this is a beautiful and wonderful piece of software. I'm very, very impressed by it. They thought carefully about what the terminal needed, what was lacking relative to what we got. And so it's got like graphics, which makes sense. Why do I have to manage completion? Like managing completion is something I'm going to have T do. But I'm less incentivized now because Warp does such a great job with it. To be honest, they don't do as good a job as Fig, which is another thing I really like. Fig
Fig's really
should
cool.
definitely be checked out. And they have the command is always at the bottom, which makes sense. So you don't know, you're not looking around to see where you are. The way they space these things out is just great. I love how it's red when there's an error. I like how you can scroll through the previous blocks. It's just very thoughtful, and it's fast. Written in Rust. It's good. I like it.
Yeah, I think when it first came out, I checked it out because of the AI stuff it was using and built on Rust. And like at that time, we were interviewing people on Rust like crazy because I felt like it was going to replace every tooling piece that was out there.
Seems to
I
be
still feel like it's just going like crazy.
Yeah,
it is. So it's amazing how many UI frameworks for like real apps, not just web apps.
Yeah.
Sorry to say real apps. But,
we should probably pull Chris back on and chat about Rust.
Yeah.
Brittany, you are up next.
So my first pick, I hope I didn't pick this. I may have picked this in another podcast. I know I picked it on Svelte Radio. So anyways, Skeleton is a UI component library, but it's built on Tailwind, which pretty much everything that I use now is on Tailwind. I do work with Svelte Sirens, Coding Cat, and we all use Tailwind. So it's a really cool toolkit, but it only focuses on SvelteKit. So it's primarily focused on using Svelte components. And if you're going to be in the Svelte ecosystem, it's really good. It uses actions and things that you can plug in to do things in Svelte. But if you're ever going to move to another framework, obviously this may not be your choice, which is Alex and I's conversation earlier about Skeleton. So there's pros and cons there, obviously, but it's just a really cool tool if you're using it in a Svelte app.
Yeah, it's a tough decision too. Like, so the other one that we often talk about is Daisy UI, which has a couple limitations, which Skeleton, mentions, but it keeps it, what's the word I'm looking for? It not Svelte specific. So
it's more general and movable. So it's like you can move it to another framework.
Yeah, when we've been rewriting over to Svelte, we actually moved a ton of stuff when we were using Daisy. and it just moved. Like we didn't have to touch it. So that was kind of amazing to me. Whereas this becomes a little more challenging if you're bouncing between React and Svelte and all the fun stuff.
I think the thing that made me want to check out and try Skeleton in a project is the theme generator. So this is one of the things that was unique to me. I know Daisy has themes, but if you click the theme generator down there, you can actually plug in your own Tailwind theme, and it gives you that config file so you can build on top of it. And I really liked that part of it, that full customizable piece. And I think Daisy could implement something like this, and that would be really cool.
I was thinking, I could be
Do
wrong.
they have one? And I just don't
I
remember.
was thinking they do at the very bottom. You can do this.
Oh, they do. Okay.
Yeah.
So I didn't realize they had one, but
I think it's always doing our purple.
yeah. So, okay. So we
I
can,
don't know. We'll talk offline more. We'll see
Yeah.
where we get. What's your second pick?
oh, my second pick has basically been what feels like my whole holiday was just like playing Minecraft. I never got into Minecraft before. Like I've tried to play a couple times and I never understood what it was about. I would just kind of wander aimlessly and not get it. And then I started building, like we play with my kids and my husband, and we just sat down as a family, and now we can all play on the same server. We build like these towns up, and then we travel and go and see other places and build up a new town. And it's been this fun like family activity that all of us can get involved in. So
That's
I've really
cool.
enjoyed it.
I don't like playing Minecraft. My son's been playing since he could function a
Yeah.
controller at all. But I love playing Minecraft Dungeons with him. I have not checked out Legends, so I'm kind of curious what that's.
I don't know that one. We just play the regular one, but we play it on PS5, and then I do have
Nice.
Java and Bedrock on the computer too, on PC.
He actually he's been doing custom commands, so he like runs over a block and it does all this crazy stuff.
I hear a lot of people get into programming through Minecraft by doing mods and things.
Yeah, that's what he's been doing. It's interesting.
Cool.
Couple things. Oh my Git, we did at work, and I actually did an interview for work. This is the coolest thing visually that I've seen come out of Git, if that's even possible. A cool thing that is. But we talk a lot about like the dependency pieces and things like that. It's really fun to see kind of all of the different things that this offers. So the way that you can like learn Git through this, as if you're challenged like me and you like really only learn visually, I found this to be really neat to be able to do it. So
is it teaching you how to use Git?
yes, yeah.
Okay,
So it's
nice.
really cool, like to learn how to like just see it happening. Like, you know me, I always have to go back to like
Yep.
the graph or something like that to actually look at it, because I'll fire a command, I'm like, I have no idea, other than like code showed up, I merged some code, I get that, but like visually, this is a huge help for me.
Yeah.
Of course, as we mentioned before the show, like everyone's talking about this, so I think I have to perfect pick it, but this is the new Chat GPT. It's freaking mind-blowing, all the stuff you can do with it. I think I asked it to code the other day. I don't know why I'm not logged in anymore, but let's try it here.
This might have been Clark's pick last week when we did.
Oh, was it?
It might have been because he used it to code a Svelte layout page.
See if this works. I might have to fast forward this part of the episode here. So yeah, here it's writing out a Svelte component completely on the fly for a login.
Yeah.
And it looks pretty decent, I would say.
It does a great job. I've been using it a
Yeah.
lot.
It's even got like the handlers correct and everything in there. It's kind of crazy.
Have you guys used the GitHub one? What's Copilot? Have you compared the difference between the two?
Copilot is not as good in my opinion, but it is in your editor right there.
Yeah.
You know, you can write a comment in the style that you would to ChatGPT, and it tries, but I've had a lot more success with ChatGPT, certainly. And I use a lot of different languages on a day-to-day basis because, you know, T supports them all. And you can ask it really obscure questions. Like, I received this error message from this tool. What do you think it means? And Google doesn't know. Stack Overflow is mixed, but ChatGPT is it gives an answer, and often it's enough that you then can Google some more stuff and figure it out. Like, that's what's been most interesting for me.
The wild part to me, like I've asked it certain things and it's like, we don't actually like use the live internet for this, so we can't find it. I'm like, what happens if you did? Like, what happens if you added a search, like whatever, Google to this? I couldn't even imagine what you couldn't do at that point. Like, we always joke about our jobs kind of going away in a few years to AI, and I'm like, yeah, like this is scary good. So
it's worrying. I've had sleepless nights worrying that you know, like I just
mark
started
this
a company and
podcast as the beginning of the end, I guess.
Like, I feel that what we're doing is somewhat AI resistant because I'd like to see an AI figure out how to make Python relocatable on Linux, which would like took me 3 or 4 days a few months back. But then again, like working with ChatGPT, it's so capable. Like, I think maybe it would be fine. We all need to be a little cautious about the future.
I think I watched like a TED Talk or something, and it was talking about, I believe it was Lake Michigan or something like that, and a drop of water going in it. And if it was from like 1900 until like last year, it had like barely even no puddle of AI. And it's because AI learns from itself as it keeps building. And by the end of this year, the lake was full. And I'm like, whoa, like that's kind of creepy to start to think about, right? So I don't know.
I've seen the video as well, and it's like for so long, like that you couldn't even see the puddle, and because it's exponential, then suddenly it's full, and that's what we're seeing, right? Like last year, like 2 years ago, at least, say, like everyone's like, AI sucks, can't do anything. Then we started to get these AI generation tools for images, and everyone's like, wow, that's pretty amazing, but it's still, you know, it's not intelligent.
Right.
Now we got these chat tools that it seems pretty smart. So next year,
When is that going to replace Google and Siri and all the things on our phones? That's what I need.
I was just reading about Bing, or like Microsoft's thing. I don't know if it's still called Bing. How they're implementing ChatGPT like into that.
Oh.
And it's like, well, that's a next step, right?
We got a bit of time because it's so expensive. Like, I saw current estimates, it's something like $1 million a day to run ChatGPT.
Wow.
So, they got a lot of funding so they can afford it, and they're getting a lot of interest and users and probably data. But yeah, the costs have to go down substantially. It's just the cost of the GPUs.
They've got a great amount of press because like Google immediately came out and said, we can do all of this today. Like you can use our services. I'm like, yeah, but you haven't shown people. Like you need to show people. So it's kind of interesting.
It's proof that you have to have a good product. You can't just have good tech.
Yep. Exactly.
Because, you could do this stuff with GPT-3 like 6 months ago.
Yeah.
But the UI sucked enough that nobody tried it. And then they made a good UI on top of it, tweaked it a little bit in various other ways, and like millions of people are now using it.
Yeah.
So, it's good.
I mean, even like Warp, when it first came out, that was their a big part of it was GPT-3 was under the hood. So no one talked about it after that because it didn't do the amazing stuff that ChatGPT does. So I don't know. Anywho, we're down like a crazy rabbit hole. So, Max, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. I appreciate everything you did with Homebrew or Brew, however you want to state that. Really incredible. I can't wait to see what you're going to do with Tea once that comes out and kind of the next.
And what it does for the open source community too.
Yeah, that's a really big part. That's hits me right in the heart on that one. So,
well, thank you.
Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.